This was almost a decade ago, and only can remember so much of it given how short of an encounter it was. I was 6 at the time and living at my grandparents'. It was late into the night, far past my bedtime, and I couldn't get any rest, so I woke up and went and made my way to the kitchen to get a cup of water. I had made it into the living room, and being a little kid, was nervous about the dark room already, but got close to the glass doors at the porch to turn on the lights. The light out of the porch was always on at night to deter intruders, like we had an active camera system, but the light was completely blocked out. I figured this out and decided to turn on and face what was causing the problem. A disgusting and massive coyote was staring right back at me and seemed to bite me through the glass. It looked rotted away and seemed to have mange. I was frozen in fear, and after what felt like an eternity staring at this undead beast, it finally gave up and ran off into the cornfield behind my grandparents' house. After that, I finally gathered myself and screamed. I never had a similar experience since, other than strange encounters in my apartment complex, which is somewhat surrounded by forest on the back end, which can lead to strange things, and even stranger people. What did I see that day? I've been asking myself that question for a while now. Honestly, just thinking of retelling this story makes me scared. I can't remember exactly what year it was, maybe 2014 or 2015. I lived near a forested area out by Glenpool, Oklahoma. Between my house and my step-grandparents' house is the forested area. It's a bit of a walk, but not that bad. So, one day, my mom was at my step-grandparents' and I was leaving their house to head back to my house, so of course I went to the forested area. I always liked going through there, but it was filled with birds singing, and besides the constant traffic, it was peaceful. But something changed. The birds didn't sing, the wind didn't blow, and there was silence. I couldn't even hear the traffic at this time, and that's when it happened. My mother was calling my name, but I was so confused. Her voice came from deeper into the woods, away from both houses. So I looked around, and just like that, she called me again, and I followed for only a couple of minutes, until all of a sudden, my entire body started going, "Get out of there now." And I turned to walk back to my house, and right when I did, the second I turned to look, I saw a black figure staring down at me from a hill. It was in the shade, and I didn't stop to ask what it was. Oh no. I hauled ass out of there, back to the step GPS, and I ran to my mom, instantly telling her what had happened. She didn't believe me. "You were just imagining it." So I thought she was right. Maybe I was, but then I got curious and asked why she was calling my name from the houses. She wasn't, and I know my mom's voice. That was her exact voice. I let it go, and soon after we moved elsewhere. I don't know how this happened, but the thing followed me, because after my cousin left the house and I was in bed trying to sleep, right outside of my window, I heard my cousin's voice. But this wasn't like the woods. It was right by my head, since the window is right above where I sleep. It was a name my cousins call me, and that's what was said outside my window. But it was wrong. It was all garbled up like a bad recording, and my entire body froze up in fear, and it kept going. But I ignored it and ended up passing out. To this day, I haven't had any more problems. Well, that I know of. But it wasn't what I saw the figure. It wasn't the voices. It was this feeling of dread that I was going to die if I didn't get out of there. It's, well, easily the most scared that I've ever been. This happened in northern Idaho, around the Canadian border. When my dad and I would go hunting, it was fairly standard practice for us to sleep under the stars in the bed of his pickup truck. I was about 8 or 9 at the time, and we had an unsuccessful day of hunting that Friday, and were going to stay the night at the site and then start back up early Saturday morning. Well, I was cozily sleeping in my bag when, around 2:30 in the morning, my dad and I both shot awake. There was some creature on the other side of the hill we were parked next to that made this sound I still haven't been able to find anywhere online. Loud as hell. It sounded like the cross of a screaming koala and a woman screaming out of primal rage. It yelled for approximately 30 seconds before silencing for about a minute. Then it screamed again. My father was at this point quickly shoving me and a few times from the back of the truck into the cabin, where he also entered and locked the door. We heard the yell one more time after we were safely locked inside the truck cabin, and I asked my dad, who, being an avid hunter and lived in northern Idaho his whole life, what was happening. And I remember him looking scared and simply saying he doesn't know. So yeah, I'm 22 now and have tried to find anything that makes that noise for years now, but have been unsuccessful. I think it's a skinwalker, so that's what I'm going with. Maybe you guys have had similar experiences. When I was younger than 10, maybe around 8 or 9, I was living in an apartment complex in Seymour, Indiana, a nice little place. I was playing with some friends of mine at the attached playground of the complex, when I swore I heard my mother calling for me to come over. But it was not in the direction I knew she was at, but instead the opposite direction. I was confused, so I told them I would be back, and I spoke to my mom, who was smoking with my aunt and grandmother. I asked her what she needed, and she was confused, saying, "I didn't say anything. Go ahead and keep playing." So I went back and went about my business, not hearing the voice again. I swear up and down that it was her voice. A few years down the road, I was watching an episode of Found Tapes, that old mockumentary that used to air on Animal Planet. It was the Skinwalker episode, and I remember feeling a chill down my spine as the event from my childhood went through my head once more. At that moment, I felt I had narrowly avoided an encounter with these things. I don't have any records of hallucinations, and the place where my mom was smoking was at least a good 3 to 4 minute walk away from the playground. Can't really say on the matter of if this is a real encounter, but I figured it was enough to finally post it on the internet. Anybody that has been on the Navajo reservation has either probably heard of some creepy things or have experienced pretty creepy things, namely skinwalkers. I have only seen one, and here is my story. I come from a small town in northern Arizona that's sandwiched between the Paiute Reservation to the north and the U.S.'s largest Navajo reservation to the south. My high school being so small, a 1A high school that has, on average, 80 students enrolled every year, always had to travel south about 10 hours one way to play another high school in any sport. This means we traveled a lot on the Navajo reservation, and we also usually stayed at hotels when we would head out to play and come home in the morning. But this trip was a little bit different. I remember the basketball coach saying that the school didn't have enough money to put up the teams in a hotel that trip, so we were going to be on the road for a total of about 12 hours. I was the only male senior to play basketball that whole season. We had just got done playing our game and headed home on our bus, Big Blue. We were headed out, and it wasn't long, about 2 hours of driving before we had entered the reservation. By this time, everybody was asleep, with it being about 2 a.m. When we had crossed the reservation's border, I noticed the bus driver had sped up and was now going about 85 miles an hour. I thought this was a little weird because he never exceeded the speed limit, at least not in my high school career. For some reason, I couldn't fall asleep like the rest of my teammates, and I just sat at the back of the bus, staring out across the desolate desert landscape that was lit up by the full moon. As I looked out, I could see a figure running towards the bus at an angle of pursuit and keeping up with the bus at 85 miles an hour. As the figure got closer, I saw that it was a humanoid form. As a matter of fact, it looked exactly like a human, only that the face was painted half black and half white with glowing eyes. Glowing eyes like a rabbit's eyes reflecting light from a spotlight.
I immediately thought, holy crap, it's a skinwalker. The skinwalker ran up to the edge of the road and just kept up pace with the bus, hurdling sagebrush and rocks while staring at me. After I made eye contact with the thing, I could not look away. It was as if something was holding my head and eyes in place. The skinwalker just smiled at me in this inhuman smile that went ear to ear, showing crooked, yellow, pointed teeth. I felt like I was going to throw up, and I was panicking through the whole ordeal. The skinwalker started to crumple down on all fours, still keeping up with the bus. I could see his bones crack and reform. Hair started appearing all over the thing's body, and in about 3 seconds was now a coyote, and it ran off back into the desert, far out of view. As soon as it was gone, I ran to the onboard bathroom and puked a mixture of food and blood. I didn't want to tell anyone for fear they would think I was crazy. I confided in my Navajo friend. She told me that I needed to see the chief, who also happened to be a big friend of mine, and get a blessing. I saw him the next day in school in the parking lot. He just came up to me and mumbled something in Navajo while waving a feathered scepter-like thing, turned around, got in his truck, and drove away. To this day, I haven't seen another skinwalker. It might be due to the fact I moved away from that town and reservation, and if I do have to go south, I go around, way around. Alright, so before I start, I have previous experiences with shadow people and spirits. What I'm about to say is a bit different. I moved to my new house, which was built in 2009. There's no history with spiritual activity whatsoever. I have 2 younger siblings who claim to see a wolf in the house. My mother has also claimed to see me when I wasn't present in the house or the room said. At night, I hear my personal restroom go off, as in the shower head splashing everywhere and random water splashing. I also see random shadows running around and hear scratching on my bedroom door and living room couch. Today I played with a candle asking what entities live here, and the only one answer I got was a wolf. I did more research and it has led me to believe it is a skinwalker. When I lit the candle, I asked for signs that something was here, and I heard growling. Anyway, if anyone can help me more with the information on skinwalkers or what possesses my home, please reach out to me.
I was on a walk about a month ago, and I was almost home. I saw something that looked like a white golden brown husky with bright blue eyes. But something felt really off about it. Its face seemed longer than a regular dog's. Its color was also kind of off for a husky. I don't really remember much about its body because of how freaked out I got. I wasn't exactly sure what to do, so I tried to act like I didn't feel anything was off. I accidentally made eye contact with it and stopped walking, and for some reason, I'm not sure. I felt too afraid to move. It was about 10 feet away, and it walked up to me and then past me. We maintained eye contact even as it walked past me until I heard somebody else on the street, and when I looked back at the thing, it was running away like a deer. I don't really see many deer anymore, but that's the only way I can describe how it moved, just like that one scene from Bambi, like prancing away almost. I would have thought I just had seen a regular coyote, if not for the coloring, the almost human-like eye contact, and the awful feeling I got when I saw it. Does anyone else know if I saw a skinwalker or not? Does anyone know what I saw?
I live in southern Utah. There's a lot of natives who live in my town, and many stories or beliefs of these creatures. Around an old mining location, there is stories of skinwalkers. One encounter, my friend was coming back from a party. They started up the car and saw a coyote coming for them. They locked the doors and began driving away. In the rearview mirror, they said they saw something running towards the car on 2 legs. It didn't seem like a human, and was keeping up with the car pretty well, even at 55 miles an hour. Most kids who have attended bonfires out there have very similar stories. Just wanted to ask if anyone has heard of skinwalkers chasing their cars. In some cases, the cars couldn't even start at all. Most natives won't go towards this old mining location or other places in my town. I live in northern Utah, but attended college in southern Utah. I had a favorite sports spot to hunt rabbits out in the desert. There's caves all over the mountains in this area, and we had heard that the Native American women and children would hide in those caves from the U.S. Cavalry to avoid being raped and murdered. Anyway, one day while hunting, we headed towards the base of the mountain to collect one of the rabbits, and we heard an unearthly low growl. It wasn't something natural, like a mountain lion or a bear. It was very deep and gave us both goosebumps. We both looked at each other and left the area. Before any of this ever happened, we had noticed a black donkey around the area. This area is miles away from anyone, and the donkey just roamed freely. We joked around and called it the devil monkey, but I'm starting to question if it was a possible skinwalker. It was there every day, just wandering around the desert, didn't make a sound, and sometimes we would catch it just staring blankly at us. Most of the time when returning home at night, we would see these black silhouettes around the mountains that looked like people, but they would always be gone by the time we got to them. Thoughts? Were we just being paranoid? Okay, before I start, I have had 7 encounters with Skinwalker. The first being when I was 9, and the last one being 3 months ago. I am now 16, so I don't know if what I call a skinwalker is what everyone else thinks a skinwalker is. I have been calling them that since the second encounter, when I was 10. Before I knew that skinwalkers were already a thing. Okay, on to the story. Like I stated earlier, I am 16 and I currently live in Massachusetts. I have also lived in Michigan and Wisconsin and have had encounters in both. I live near Boston, but was going on a road trip with my friend and his family out to their new place in the more remote parts of Massachusetts. And yes, Massachusetts has remote parts. I'll call my friend Chad. We got to their house, and I was planning on staying for about a week to help them get settled in and to see the surrounding areas. At the edge of their property, they have these woods that start off with just a few trees here and there, but after a 5-minute walk, they get really damn thick. On the 3rd day of me being there, Chad's mom says she wants to give me and Chad a day off so we could do whatever we wanted. At first, we wandered around the property and hung around the house. Then, we choose to walk to the closest town. This takes 30 minutes. The town's small, and there isn't much to do, but I'm happy just to be back. We're in a place like I lived for most of my life. Small and in the middle of nowhere. We talked to the owner of an ice cream shop who told us a bit of history about the town. Nothing important or exciting. After that, we started back to Chad's house. We got back around noon and I suggested we go for a walk in the woods. Chad, who isn't the outdoorsy type, said no, but after a couple of minutes of me nagging him to go, he agreed. Even though I go out all the time, I camp and walk trails, at night most of the time. I have gotten paranoid due to the skinwalkers and other stuff, so I always like to have my pocket knife with me when I go out like this, so I ran to the house to go get it. We started into the woods, leaving a really obvious trail. Like I said, the woods are pretty thick. At first, Chad spends his time grumbling things like, there are too many bugs and it's too damn warm out to be doing this. Keep in mind, last month was October. After a while, he started to enjoy being outside and actually said he liked it and wanted to go farther into the woods. By now, it was about 4:30 and it was starting to get dark, but I didn't really care at all that much. We kept going and dark fell rapidly to the point where I couldn't see much. Okay, thank you for staying with me for the story this far. This is the part with the encounter. We had started on our way back, but at some point we got separated. I noticed this and turned the flashlight app on my phone on, spinning around to see if I could see Chad. I couldn't. I called out, "Can you hear me? Can you say something?" I waited, and a few moments later, off to my right, I heard a feeble stammer. Zach. Zach is my name. It sounded just like Chad, and I quickly turned in the direction of the noise and slowly walked toward it. I didn't see anything, so I moved my light horizontally to try and spot anything. I called out again, "Chad?" and got Zach. Again, it was much stronger and louder this time. I walked forward with more confidence, but stopped dead in my tracks as I heard something big moving very quickly through the brush right behind me. I whipped around frantically and came face to face with Chad. At first I was stunned. I had heard him from the opposite direction. Up to this point in my life, I'd only encountered a skinwalker with another person once, and we were together when it happened. So this situation was new to me. "What the? Why did you walk behind to get to me? Why didn't you come from the same direction as your voice?" I practically yelled at him, overcome by anger and being tricked. "What are you talking about? You were the one changing directions," Chad yelled back to me. "What?" I said quietly. I shined my light on him, and I could see he was obviously shaken. "I heard you call my name, and I started walking to you. You sounded scared or hurt at first, but after a few minutes, you started saying my name normally. Then you stopped answering my calls, and I heard you from behind me, and I saw your light, so I started running at you," he explained. I paled, finally putting the pieces together. I had encountered skinwalkers that could impersonate a person's voice before, and I realized that a skinwalker or something of the sort was in the woods with us. There was the faint noise of movement behind me, and I turned around to see a horrible sight, not 10 feet from me. Its head looked like a wolf's, like the kind you would see at the zoo. It was tall, maybe 6.5 feet tall. Its head, shoulders, arms, and chest were all covered in thick gray and white fur. Its legs and most of its stomach held a much thinner pelt of the same fur. Both Chad and myself saw this creature and ran faster than I thought we could. For whatever reason, the creature did not give chase, and we made it out of the forest without incident. Chad told his family, who of course didn't believe him. I didn't tell mine because they hadn't believed me about this stuff in the past. Chad has not gone back in the woods and has not seen the beast again. It didn't look like the other skinwalkers I had encountered before, and at this point, I only call it a skinwalker because I have no other name for it other than a wolfman, but I am not calling it that. I have looked it up and the only thing I could find is a werewolf, but I don't think that it is. For one reason, it wasn't a full moon out. If you have any ideas on what this creature was, I'm open to suggestions. So, my brother was telling me about a skinwalker story that he encountered a while ago that went something like this. A gathering of people, or a caravan party. The narrator did not know everyone there. He notices that the number of people at the party begins to fluctuate and decrease throughout the night, and everyone else starts to notice too. Some of them go out to look for the missing people, and the narrator stays around the fire. Although the people left separately, they all return after some time, all at once, with the missing people. So the party begins to quiet down, and the people who were once talking are sitting and listening silently. The narrator becomes aware and decides to go to bed because it's a bit boring, and some others do too. Right as he is going to sleep, he looks out the caravan window to see that everybody left outside is sitting silently and motionless around the fire. He is woken up the next day by someone else, apparently at the gathering, asking if he was okay. Apparently, everyone who left the camp was found unconscious in the fields in various locations, and their apparent replacements were nowhere to be found. This is how he told it to me.
I traveled all around Utah, maybe 11 months ago, and I've been really into the stories since then, but won't speak of them out loud. My fiance will speak of them out loud. He came inside tonight and tells me that he thinks he's seen a you-know-what, and that we need to stop listening to those stories at nighttime. We heard the dogs bolt down the stairs, so he hops up to go outside. We've got a Rhodesian Ridge back that hops the fence at his leisure, and a blue heeler who alerts us to everything on the property very vocally. Our two dogs run into, well, not two, but right into the fence and don't bark, which is incredibly unusual. The gait of the black figure was large and loud. It crossed an acre and a half in about half a second. It sounded wobbly, but like a human or a bipedal gait. It went diagonal across the wood-filled yard next to me, which you can see through the woods when they aren't thick. In other half a second, it was walking like a regular person and had made it up the length of the street and took a left at the four-way. Once it turned there, it had a normal speed. My fiance came back inside with chills telling me this. It was just dark, not taking on odd shapes, but even in a well-lit spot, it's like the figure sucked in all the light around it. It didn't move like a human, and I've never seen my dogs or fiance act this way. None of them ever show fear. What could it have been?
So, let me go ahead and give you some background information to where and when this encounter happened. The place this encounter took place is at the Centennial Valley, which is the most beautiful place on Earth, in my opinion. But the downside to it is that it's about 4 hours north of bumfuck nowhere, and is near many Native American hunting and arrowhead making spots, so it does have the right area for a skinwalker, or something of the sort, to be there. I was about 14 when this happened, and I still go there, even after the encounter, believe it or not. So, what happened was, I was exploring the hills near me, when me and my family usually stayed during visits, so I knew the area fairly well, but it is very large, so I don't know all of it. But anyway, I was exploring a hill I hadn't been to very often, when suddenly, I get this odd feeling of dread that just suddenly washed over me. So I looked around to see if anything weird was causing, and when I noticed my dog Joey, who is not easily frightened, but even he looked scared. But I was armed with a recurve bow and bear spray, so I decided to continue on my trek despite the bad feelings. After about 20 minutes of walking, the feeling came back, only a bit stronger, and I could feel my adrenaline starting to pump through my veins. So I glanced around again, but this time I saw a coyote with a tattered hide running on the tip of the hill. But the odd part of this was it was angling. It ran towards me, which was odd considering I had a large dog, a German Shepherd and Rottweiler breed, in case that might mean something. And my dog usually scared most animals off because of his loud bark. So as the coyote continued its descent, I decided to fire a shot from my bow, just to try and scare it off. I aimed my bow just a bit in front of the small beast, but as I released the arrow, the coyote sped up slightly. After about a second, the arrow had impaled the creature. Shocked because of the sudden increase in speed of the little thing, I decided to go up and make sure the coyote was dead. As I walked up the hill, the beast began to move and wiggle itself off the arrow, and then one instant it was on the arrow, the next it was off and giving me a death stare. At this point, my dog was freaking out, and then I started barking as the beast began to walk in my direction, only it was standing on its hind legs. Startled, I quickly put another arrow on my bow, this time with a broad head, and I shot the coyote dead in the chest. This time, a little freaked out and just as much convinced that it must be dead now, I began to walk home when again it got off the arrow and began to run again. Only this time, I was thoroughly freaked out and on the verge of shitting myself, so I broke into a dead sprint back for home, only stopping to make sure my dog didn't try and fight the monster, only he was ahead of me. After about 10 minutes, I was completely out of breath and I could not hear the beast running behind me, so I decided I would hit it with one more arrow to give me another momentary head start. When I knocked the arrow and turned back to find the creature was standing on a perch farther back than where it had started. I calmed down somewhat and I started walking home, and I never saw that monstrosity again, and hopefully I never will. This story takes place in a very small town called Elbert, Colorado, that's very far out in the middle of nowhere. Like a grocery trip, took a 45-minute drive just to get to a store. I moved out there in the summer of 2013, when I was about 11. My family lived on an 8-acre piece of property in a fairly thick pine forest, with the house just outside the very edge of it. The driveway to the house was a super crappy, super long dirt road that led out to the main street that had to be a little less than 1/8 of a mile away from the house. To this day, I think that place was the most beautiful, peaceful place that I've ever gone to. The only sounds that could be heard were those of nature and our chickens, as we could not hear the rare car that would pass by. The nights were the best part about the place, though. Because of the lack of city lights, I was able to see every detail of the night sky, down to the dimmest of stars. Because of the darkness, however, you weren't able to see a single thing below the horizon of the night sky. Along with that, there were several packs of coyotes that lived out there, and every night they'd all be howling at each other. With enough of them, the noise would almost sound like water. The only thing that really sucked about the property, however, was the walk that we had to make just to take the trash out. The garbage company would only accept the cans that were brought out to the main road. We'd normally take the trash out before it got dark, but occasionally I'd forget it and would have to do it all at dark, which I normally didn't mind. The trip would normally be super peaceful to walk it out, and we had headlamps at the ready so that we could actually see where we were going in the dark. Well, the summer before I moved out, there was a night where I forgot to take out the trash during the day, and the batteries on the headlamps were dead. This meant I had to try to navigate my own way down our driveway, almost completely blind. I went outside and stood next to the trash cans for a minute or two, staring into the darkness in order to hopefully adjust my eyes. Staring into the darkness, though, I felt like there was something off. The normal coyote sound was gone, and for some reason, my eyes would just not adjust to the darkness. I kept staring into the abyss, looking for any sign that my eyes might be adjusting, but to no luck. Then, this terrible feeling tore its way into my chest. The best way that I can describe it is as if this darkness, this abyss that I was staring into, was staring back. No, into me. I was frozen with fear. I knew I was alone out there, but something told me that if I were to walk into the darkness, I would not be returning. I continued staring, but almost unable to look away from the darkness for a long time, before my mom came out to check on me. Her opening the door seemed to break me out of my trance, and I ran to her and started crying. She looked at me confused and noticed that I still hadn't taken out the trash. After telling her what I felt, she laughed a little and gave me some encouraging words, telling me that if there was anything out there, our dogs would have surely noticed it by now. She then told me to come back in 10 minutes for ice cream. I turned back around and walked back to our trash cans, shaking. I had never been so scared in my life. And what of nothing? I chuckled to myself, realizing the absurdity of it. When I took my eyes back off the ground, the chuckle turned back into a cry. I realized that I wasn't scared of nothing. I was terrified that there was something out there that I could not see, waiting for me to leave the light of the house lamp to attack. Then, the coyote started, and my eyes started adjusting. Whatever might have been out there was gone, along with all of my fear. The tears stopped along with most of the fear, and I was able to start dragging the trash cans down. The walk was somewhat scary, though I was able to let the sound of the coyotes distract me. By the time I got back up to my house, I felt safe again, but I could not stop thinking about that dark abyss. While I lived at the house, that was probably my scariest encounter. There were other scarier encounters while I was there, but the only one could even slightly relate to the others takes place at a friend's house. For the sake of privacy, I'll refer to this friend as D. D had a property that was about 10 minutes from mine, and we shared the same forest, with the only separation being a road in between us. We had been hanging out for a while that day, playing a bunch of video games, when I had an idea to go out in the dark and explore his property. He agreed, and so we waited until night fell. After a few more hours of video games and dinner, it finally seemed dark enough to go out, so we did. We were wandering his 7-acre property, being pretty stupid, loud, and making half-ass attempts at trying to get at each other, a little scared. After some time of this, we eventually wandered into a clearing, and I just guess the attempts settled in for both of us. At the same time, we looked around, concerned. There was something off, and it felt like we were being watched. Trying to keep a good mood, and maybe trying to keep my mind off whatever was making us feel this way, I suggested we make a scary video to scare little D's brother. D laughed and agreed, and pulled out his phone and started recording. We were acting like we kept seeing things in the woods. I would throw a stick when the camera was facing away, make a weird grunting noise, and anything and such to make the video creepier. We both were having a good time. However, deep down, I felt like something was very off, and I think that he did too. Then, out of nowhere, a twig snapped behind us. I automatically assumed that D had thrown something, but when I looked at him to confirm, he was looking at me to see if I had thrown it. Now, before this moment, I was trying very hard to make my voice sound as scared as possible for the video. However, as soon as I heard this, I didn't need to try anymore. We stared in the direction that the twig snap came from for a second, hoping to make something out, but to no avail. Once again, my eyes would not adjust to the darkness, except this time, instead of physically standing in the light, I was inside of the darkness. Partially for the video, and partially for my sanity, I whispered, "Run." D nodded slightly, his face illuminated by his phone, and we started sprinting in the direction of his house. I don't think I had ran so hard in my life beforehand, but there was a feeling in my gut still telling me that we weren't fast enough, that we needed to hide. D must have felt the same thing. He took the lead and led us to a nearby cat shed. A motion sensor light flicked on as we passed by, and we got in the shed as quickly as we could. After getting the door shut, D turned on his light, revealing the inside of the shed. At the time, it seemed to me like the cats were hiding from something. However, looking back on it, they were probably just sleeping in their beds that were in a corner of the shed. This freaked me out even more. D stated climbing the wall of the shed and led us out onto almost a shelf-like structure that had a window that we could look out of. D sat on one side of the window, and I sat on the other, so that we were facing each other and we could see both angles from the window. Eventually, with the light on outside and the added comfort of a roof over our head, we started to calm down, and the focus on the video became apparent. As we were talking about what might have been out there, the motion sensor light turned off, dropping the outside back into the dark. We went quiet as the uneasy feeling washed over us again. To me, it didn't feel like we were being watched anymore, more like we were being looked for. We started intently at looking out the window, looking for signs of anything, when I thought I started hearing footsteps. Having a wall between us and the steps muffled them, so I couldn't be sure what I was hearing. I asked D about them, and he said that he had heard them too. However, I'm pretty sure he was saying that for the video. We went quiet again, listening. Then I heard the footsteps get slightly louder. One of the cats starts rubbing up against us, which distracted us and caused us to turn around and start petting him. Because who wouldn't pet a cat? As we were petting him, the outdoor motion sensor light flicked on. I felt goosebumps crawl up my arms to my face as we slowly turned around. We looked out the window and saw nothing. D told me that we should get inside, and I agreed with him. We carried the cat back down to its bed and got ready to make a 50-yard sprint directly to his house. He opened the door, I shut it, and then we were in the cold, dark woods, running as hard as we could from whatever turned on that light. After what felt like forever sprinting, we finally got to D's front door and we rushed inside. We slammed his sliding glass door and didn't sleep until we saw the sun rising the next morning. Though these encounters were terrifying at the time, a lot of it can be easily explained by me just freaking myself out. There was nothing out there during the trash can story, and at Dee's house, we found raccoon prints the next morning outside of the cat shed. None of these things ever stopped me from loving the woods, and within a week, I was certain that I was just making things up to myself. I continued loving the woods, and we lived for the next year. Though these encounters were terrifying at the time, a lot of it can be easily explained by me just freaking myself out. There was nothing out there during the trash can story, and at Dee's house, we found raccoon prints the next morning, outside of the cat shed. None of these things ever stopped me from loving the woods, and within a week, I was certain that I was just making things up to myself. I continued loving the woods. We lived for the next year that we lived there, but eventually, my family and I ended up moving out. My dad got a job offer in Minnesota that would improve our financial situation and not force my dad to a 2-hour commute every day. Minnesota, however, proved to be the worst place that I have lived in, at least for the first year or two. After living in such a small town and adapting to my friends in Elbert so much, I found it very hard to make any friends in Minnesota. I was constantly thinking about my friends and the girlfriend I had left in Elbert, and refused to work to make friends, and the people at my new school didn't particularly seem to like me. I would still talk to my other friends almost every night, playing video games and stuff with them, which was almost the only thing that seemed to make me any sort of happy while I was out there. With my mental health in the garbage can, and my lack of any friends, my parents agreed to let me go out to Elbert during the summer and visit. After the first visit, my mental health was way better, and I started opening up to other people at the new school as well. So, my parents agreed to make the Elbert trips annual, as long as I planned them. So, every year since then, I've been visiting my friends in Elbert. The most recent visit is the reason that I'm writing this. Every year I would hang out with my friends who I'll call K, T, and D. The same D from the story I just told you. Because of stupid teenager drama, they would almost never hang out together. One of my favorite things to do with them was, ironically, go squatching. For those that don't know, squatching is looking for Bigfoot, typically making their hypothetical calls and using other communication methods of theirs in hope to find one. This was simply an excuse to go yell in the forest at night for me. This most recent visit, I had finally managed to get K, T, and D to all hang out together. We had planned on making a short film that was based on these stupid videos that T and I used to make. We ended up trying to film it, but ended up with like one scene before we decided to just play video games instead. Well, one day after dinner, the group came up with an idea to make a squatching video. T, K, and I filmed one last year, so we figured that we would do another one this year to try and make this an annual thing. We took K's little brother out with us to film, and we started recording our video. The sun was still up, so it had no intention of being any sort of scary or funny ironic video. We wandered around for an hour or so, making shitty Australian accents and shouting for Bigfoot, when Kay had the idea that we could split up and look for Sasquatch. So we did. We each went off on our own way in the woods, with the cameraman following me, each making the occasional squatch call and tree knock. We had some walkie-talkies with us, so we were able to tell each other when we were making a call. After some time, D, T, and I found each other and decided to group up and meet K up in a clearing. We started walking, and K came in over the radio, saying that he was about to make a call. We waited, and then from the forest came the most terrifying noise I have ever heard somebody make. The best way that I could describe it was like a dying elephant that had a smoking problem. Then, he came in over the radio. "Was that you guys?" he asked. We assumed that he was just joking around for the video, so we joked back. "No, mate, we've pissed the squatch off. We need to get out of here. Meet us back at your house." And we ran out of the forest quickly when we met up with Kay. He apparently had cut himself on some barbed wire, and that, plus the terrifying scream we heard him make earlier, seemed to put us off. So we decided to stop for the time being. We went inside and played Halo for hours, messing with each other and doing other stupid stuff, not mentioning what had happened while squatching the rest of the night. When night had more than passed, and it was around midnight, we decided to go back outside and continue squatching, this time without a camera and a bunch of flashlights. We decided to go pretty deep into the forest before not making any calls, as to not wake Kay's family and neighbors up. Eventually, we got to the point that we had to split up from earlier and had to decide what to do. After talking about it some, we decided to see where Kay had run off to. Then I made the first squatch call of the night. After the call, the woods went completely silent. In my previous story, I talked about the abyss watching me. This was almost the same, except it felt as if the forest were listening to us. We laughed about it, poked fun at each other, trying to creep one another out, and started walking. Kay led us pretty deep into his woods, and eventually stopped in a small opening, showing us that this had been where he had radioed us from before the call. The thing is, Kay didn't refer to the call as his. He referred to it as one of ours. This didn't register at the moment, but thinking back on it, definitely gives me the creeps. After a bit more joking around, Kay decided to take us to the boundary of his property, where he had cut himself. We walked in a straight line, toward the fence, and I think Kay figured we'd follow the fence to where he cut himself. As we walked deeper into the forest, though, our jokes started to die down. The silence, darkness, and this feeling started to get to us. We were starting to suspect that we were being watched. We arrived at the fence and started walking along when Kay stopped, confused. I looked at where his flashlight was pointing, and there was a fence. However, the fence was almost dented, if that makes any sense. It looked like something had come through and simply stepped on the fence with enough weight that the fence couldn't bring itself to its natural position. I shined my flashlight into the other property and asked Kay about it. I can't remember exactly what he told me, but I think I remember him saying it was a large piece of property owned by Native American land and had once been sacred or something like that. That was probably terribly wrong, so take that information with a grain of salt. Our group looked at each other. "Let's go over it," I remember myself saying. "Worst case scenario, we find whosever property it is and we could tell him about the broken gate." This was obviously not the worst case scenario, especially out in the country like this, but we continued anyway. After going through some pretty heavy woods, we found a clearing, and then we felt something awful. The hair on the back of all of our necks stood up at once, and we started hearing twig snaps in every which direction. This was a massive change from the previously quiet forest that we had just been walking through. We quickly shined our lights every which way, looking for anything that could be causing our fear, when Dee's light stopped on something. "Guys, do you see that?" We all shined our lights on the spot that he was looking at. I couldn't see anything at first and was about to say no when I made out what looked like a reflection of eyes. We each confirmed, one by one, each of us starting to make out the eyes. Then we did something stupid. We started walking toward it. Maybe this was because there were four of us and one pair of eyes. Or maybe it was how luring they looked. But every step we took, the more they faded out, until we couldn't see them anymore. Then, we felt the hairs of the back of our necks stand up even more than ever, as if pointing in the direction of something that did not approve of us being there. We stood back to back, making a square, as we felt the presence circling us. "Guys, let's get out of here," one of the group members said. We all nodded and waited, and then when we felt the time was right, we sprinted. We all ran as fast as we could, jumping over the fallen fence, through the forest, and until eventually I saw the house. I heard the others run by me, hidden by the forest, when suddenly I stopped. "Ryan, help!" My heart sank. I had just heard the other three run by me, yet this was the perfect voice of Kay, calling for my help. I shoved the thought that this could be Kay out of my head. After all, I had just heard all three of my friends run by me. I began sprinting again, hoping to catch up with Kay. After sprinting for a minute or two, I caught up with them, beginning to slow down, almost at the house. I caught up with Kay and was about to try to talk to him when we both flinched backward, almost falling. Just to the right of us, there was a crashing thud, thud of something that had just hit the ground. We quickly recovered and sprinted in toward the door, urging the others on. When we finally got back to Kay's house, we slammed the door behind us and had to just rest, panting, when we all seemed to calm down. Kay asked what the hell happened out there. We all went around and shared what they saw. D said he saw the reflection of eyes, and more than what was just in the clearing. Kay said he saw the reflection of eyes in the clearing and heard the two thuds that freaked us both out. T said he might have seen the eyes in the clearing and some yellow-red ones as we're closing the door. I stated what I saw, but decided to leave out the voice since I wasn't, and am still not sure I heard what I heard. We sat down and almost immediately started searching up cryptids, looking for all other possible stories like ours. Within half an hour, our primary theories were of a goat man, a Jersey devil, and possibly a Wendigo. Almost in response to our theories, we had heard two ever-so-quiet footsteps on the roof. Eventually, we got to sleep, but after that, we never spoke a word of it again. Maybe a year or so later, I was trying to creep myself out when I found a story about Wendigos. These stories sounded familiar to my experience, but didn't seem to be quite right. Well, that led into a rabbit hole, and eventually, I learned about skinwalkers. Since then, I've loved hearing stories about them, and am very fascinated with what they are and how they hunt. I've stopped believing recently, however. After rethinking my tale for the 100th time, I'm 90% sure that what we heard and saw was just a horse that we got onto the bad side of, which is oddly common, I guess. What really spooks me, however, is when I let the 10% wonder and think that it might have been something paranormal. Either way, I don't understand how Kay still lives on that property. I'll be visiting him this summer, so I'll see them again, but hopefully we won't encounter whatever we might have last time. First, I feel as though I have to give you readers some background information about myself. I was raised by my mother, who was 50% Cherokee and 50% French. Us kids have never met our biological grandpa, and believes in paranormal things but tries to pretend that it's not there. And by my father, who is Scottish and English and German and Jewish by blood. He, on the other hand, is a 100% atheist and is rather skeptical about things he cannot explain. He endeavors to be a logical and scientific person in all things. Well, due to major differences in personalities, beliefs, and values, they divorced when I was 8. She soon married my stepfather, who is a devout Southern Baptist from Mississippi, and basically gave up her identity as a native and became a God-fearing woman. Despite issues with my mother, my dad continued to let us visit with her mom and stepdad because he felt they were good people. They taught us many things about native culture, spirituality, legends, and the people. My grandmother and I spent a lot of time together, so I was given an opportunity to learn her medicine. My grandma comes from a long line of medicine men and women, and one is herself. Now, so many years later, at the ripe old age of 23, I am one myself. So now you have some insight, and I'll continue. This isn't a ghost story, but I do believe it qualifies as paranormal, as it is outside usual daily happenings. About 2 years ago, my father, brother, and I moved into a new home, a little more in the country than our previous homes had been. Something we all thoroughly enjoyed because we grew up immersed in nature and a love for the land. Shortly after moving there, about 3 months in, I decided it was time to expand my family by getting myself a puppy. This would be the first dog that would actually be in my care. I've always had a very strong connection to dogs as my guiding spirit is a wolf. I learned this after a vision quest many years ago, but that's a story for another time. After a while of searching, I came across a beautiful 5-month-old male German Shepherd Pit Bull mix. I went to meet him and instantly fell in love. He was the greatest, very sweet, kind to the cats, and protective of me. He became my best friend, everything you could want in a dog. Now, anyone who has owned a puppy or young dog will know, potty training is a task. Even after being with us 2 months, he was still waking me up every 2 to 4 hours to go outside. Hard on the heart rhythm, but had to be done. On this occasion, in particular, we got a late night visitor that we weren't expecting. Like I said, my dog woke me up in the night. This time it was around 2:45 in the morning, and I wasn't ready, but I dragged myself out of bed and clicked on the leash. Opening the back door greeted me with a cool breeze. I rolled my eyes and went out into the yard with my pooch. He did the usual dog thing, sniffed around and jumped in the freshly cut grass, completely forgetting what we'd come outside to do in the first place. I whistled at him, recaptured his attention, and he got back to business. As he squatted, I turned my head to the sky, offering him some privacy. The moon was exceptionally large that night, almost full but not quite bright. During this observation, I began to realize there was no typical nighttime noise around me. As if that wasn't unusual enough, I had a shiver go down my spine, and my arm hair began to stand on end. That's when I heard my dog let out a low growl as he pinned himself against my legs. When I looked down, his tail was tucked and hackles were raised. When I tried to move and he pressed himself against me more, another shiver came over me, and now I took the opportunity to follow where his eyes were looking. When I did, I was looking at what appeared to be a coyote. Not totally uncommon in the area. We'd heard them on many nights living here. But this was different, looked different, and felt different. The most frightening thing, however, was that it was looking right back at me. I didn't move, didn't take my eyes off it. That's how I was able to see its features so clearly in the moonlight. Its fur looked thin, even bald in some spots. Its eyes were yellow, not reflective yellow like you'd see on a dog in the dark, but yellow like the sun. Very powerful and almost blinding. Then, looking more closely, I noticed its back legs were longer than a normal coyote. Longer than any canine creature should be, actually. Starting at the hips and going down, they seemed to look almost bipedal in design. That's when it dawned on me just what I was saying. I picked up my 60-pound dog, never taking my eyes off this creature. As I did, I said a Cherokee prayer in my head that I'd learned from my grandmother. As if it was physically upset, it backed up slightly, and then I heard a voice that perfectly mimicked my grandmother say, "Why would you do that, Mikers?" No one aside from my grandparents ever called me that. It was their special name for me. With that, I darted for the door, dog still in my arms, entered, put him down and locked it behind me. The noise must have woken my brother because he came into the kitchen all bothered, asked me what was going on and why the dog was all riled up. I held my finger to my mouth and shut off the light. We then made our way into the living room and shut that light off as well. And like something out of a horror movie, the outline of a tall humanoid thing shone through the stained glass of the small window on the door, thanks to the bright moonlight. We both froze, and he made a grab for the knob when it started to turn. Capturing it just in time to lock it, that's when it spoke to him, but this time in my grandfather's voice. "Bubba, why don't you let Grandpa in?" His face turned ghost white, and he turned to me. That's when I mouthed the word, and he paled even more. It began to tap on the glass, and we both went into my room and ignored the knocking. The next night, around the same time, the tapping only grew louder. We sat in the living room praying to a Cherokee sun goddess that it would go away. The tapping turned into knocks, which turned into pounding the more we prayed. This must have woken my father, because he came downstairs in a huff. We told him about the night prior, during the day, but he didn't believe us and thought it was just one of my brother's friends being an asshole. So, when he saw the silhouette in the window, he grew more angry and made a beeline for the door. We yelled at him to not open it, but he did. However, instead of harming him, it seemed to be afraid because it got down on 4 legs again and disappeared down the road. My dad's face paled as he stumbled back a few steps. He locked the door behind him, and we all went to bed. The next day we talked about the situation. I explained to him the natives call this creature a skinwalker. They aren't very common in my native legend. They're more of a Western native legend, but my grandparents still taught us about them. Dad, being the skeptic, just summed it up to a weird thing he couldn't explain. Later that day, I went to our local craft store and bought juniper ash as my grandma instructed and sprinkled it around our house. It never returned, but my dog was never the same after that night. It's as though the entire experience changed him. He went from a loving animal to mean and unpredictable. He started lashing out at anyone who wasn't female. We tried correcting it over the course of a year and a half, but nothing helped. He finally harmed my brother, causing him to bleed, and I was forced to find him a new home. Luckily, he is with a couple who are both female, and he seems much happier. But even to this day, I guarantee he won't go out at night. I didn't mention the name of the creature very many times because it's considered a bad omen in native culture to give those things any energy. If anyone is nervous after reading this, please feel free to message me, and I will happily walk you through a prayer.
My boyfriend and I were on our way to meet his parents at a campsite last night, up on a small mountain in central Arkansas. It was dark by the time we got up there, and we were traveling down some pretty windy roads through the forest. We start going past a little field area by the side of the road filled with tall grass, and I saw some eyes reflecting light, super bright, almost like they were lights themselves. I've never seen a normal animal's eyes reflect a light like this. It was weird. The grass was pretty tall, so I only really saw the head, but it looked like it just was some creature literally bouncing through the field. Didn't seem like it had any fur, and I didn't see any ears. It looked like it may have been on 2 feet, because it definitely didn't look like any 4-legged animal from its posture alone. We thought it might have been a deer, but we saw some actual deer a few minutes later, and it looked nothing like those. They were smaller, and their eyes weren't reflecting the light like that thing was. I didn't get a super good look, because I only saw it for a few seconds, but it was just weird. It wasn't like my brain spent any time trying to figure out what it was, it just immediately went to fear. Like, that thing isn't normal, get away. There have also been disappearances in that area that fit the criteria for being skinwalker related. Not really related to this story, but my boyfriend's uncle has seen multiple Sasquatch on this mountain too, so there are other cryptids here. Do you think we actually saw a skinwalker?
So, I have been kind of wanting to share my creepy encounters and experiences for a bit, but what my sister told me a few days ago made me want to share this possible skinwalker encounter. I'm Native American, and so my father and siblings. My mother has very little, but there is some. We are not involved with any tribes, but I do enjoy looking, reading, and trying to be active in the native culture. There are also plenty of tribes in the state I live in. A few weeks ago, I was asking my dad about the tribes around here and asking if there was a possibility that skinwalkers could be up there. He kind of avoided the question, but did tell me that a tribe up north was notorious for murders, both by members and unexplained ones. I tried seeing if I could get any more answers from him, but there was nothing else. Now, time for the actual encounters. Both my sister and I have experienced them the most, but my brother has also had some unexplained scratching and whispering at night. It was rare, but it did happen. The encounter started at the beginning of the summer in 2017. Now, me and my sister share a room. She's always been scared of the dark, so being the nice big brother I am, I have shared a room with her always. Anyway, it was around maybe 11 p.m. when me and my sister heard a weird sound. It sounded like a bird call, but definitely not normal. It sounded like someone with strep throat trying to mimic a crow. Both me and my sister kinda just looked up from our phones and gave each other a weird look. We live in an apartment complex that's located on the edge of a small town. The town is a druggie town, so for like the first hour, we thought it was just some druggie outside tripping out. But it lasted about 3 hours, ending around 2 a.m. My sister had fallen asleep, and everything else was quiet. But then I heard the big dogs down the road start barking like crazy. I thought it was just weird timing, or that they saw an animal. But looking back, I think it might have been a skinwalker. A few weeks go by, and the same sound starts at around 10 p.m., or maybe 11, and would usually end around 1 or 2 in the morning. At first, me and my sister didn't really pay attention to it, and eventually thought it was actually a weird bird. But one night I had slept over at my friend's house, which was a trailer on the edge of town right near mine. Me and my friend were just about to fall asleep on the couches when I heard that same sound. I sat up straight and looked at my friend. "You heard that, right?" I'd asked her, thinking it was imaginary. "Yeah, it sounded like a bird." "Why?" she told me back, probably thinking I was crazy. "Oh, it's nothing. I just hear that a lot," I replied back. If I told her, she probably would have believed me, but I just tried to make it seem like nothing. That night, the sound lasted until I fell asleep. Fast forward another week, and we're hearing the same sounds at night. My sister now was starting to get paranoid. I was too, but I just told her it was nothing, just a dumb bird. At this point in the summer, I was listening to lots of Skinwalker stories and started connecting their similarities to what was happening with me. One night, me and my sister were just chilling in our beds with our windows open when the noises started up again. This time they sounded more ragged and sick. They stopped pretty quickly after they started. Me and my sister just shrugged at each other and went back to our phones when suddenly, right next to our window, we heard the most blood-curdling scream. It wasn't human. It sounded like a baby screaming, crossed with a dog's yelp. With that sound ringing in our ears, me and my sister both jumped and she screamed, hiding under her covers. I honestly hid under my covers with my heart racing. We waited what seemed like hours until my sister whisper yelled at me, asking if it was safe. I had to put my big boy pants on and uncover to close the window. I did so rather quickly, but when I got to the window, nothing was there. My sister wanted to tell our parents, but I knew they'd never believe us. The next day, though, I had asked if they had heard anything, which they said they had not. I brought this stuff up to my 3 friends one night while having a sleepover. At first, most of them took it as a joke, but then I explained how I felt that I was being followed and having a sense of dread 24/7. They then seemed to believe me, and I told them that I thought it followed me to their houses. And what freaked us all out was that night, my friend's dog started barking and growling like crazy. Afterwards, one of my friends had remarked, "Why did we become friends with a Native American?" It made us laugh and calm the atmosphere the rest of the night. Back home, my sister had told me that the noises stopped while I was gone, which pretty much had confirmed to me that it was indeed following me. Constantly now, I was feeling dread and could not sleep at night. That scream ringing in my ears and the sound outside increasing by each night, sounding more and more sickly. Like I said, this had been lasting all summer, so eventually we just got used to it. Sometimes it sounded like there was more than one, but as long as it didn't get close, we didn't care. At my friend's house, it was still the same, paranoid of seeing it. Even walking my dogs at night freaked me out because their gaze would fixate on something in the tree line, just out of my sight. They wouldn't bark or anything, just stare, then start sprinting towards home. I'd follow, gripping the leash so they wouldn't get away. It really freaked me out. One night, I caught a glimpse of it though, through the curtain crack. The noise had gotten closer. Me and my sister were prepared to hear another of those terrible screams, but no. I looked out the window as the wind blew in, and I saw what I believe was the skinwalker. It looked so sickly and thin, its eyes sunken, and its face looked like it was scowling. I just stared at it until the curtain moved back. Then it was gone. The dread had filled me even more. After that, we heard less and less. Towards the end of the summer, we had heard it again, and I decided to record the sound. It sounds weirder on the recording, but it's there. I wish there was a way to show it, but everything had died down until recently. I still have the constant feeling of dread, and I've become more paranoid, but I know what I've been experiencing and hearing is real. Last month, me, my siblings, and Dad saw a white deer. I know that means good luck, but just the other day, after my dad picked me up from work, he told me that on the way, he had seen a white wolf sitting on the side of the road, just watching the cars. I don't know if this is significant, but it's something to note. Also, my sister has been experiencing stuff all in her room. Just last week, she came running out of the room, saying she had heard scratching at the window. It's all just super freaky and weird. I'm already kind of a paranoid guy, but this is just all too weird just to be a coincidence. I just hope it stops. I'd love to get a good night of sleep.
The sun sets awfully early in my neck of the woods, but I still take my dog hiking in the national park, even after my shift. Sadly, it's around 9 or 10 p.m. At the earliest, usually until 11 or midnight. It's been a routine to carry a flashlight, my GPS watch, water, bowl, and my firearm tucked away. It's beautiful to truly be alone and submersed into nature, so I leave behind my phone. No signal here anyway. Half an hour into my last hike, I'm chatting with my dog about my day. Then, I heard a piano. It was faintly playing long, sweet notes towards me from each direction. Cookies instantly went rigid. Her body's stoic and strong. She does not even do this when there's a predator. She will take off running and ask questions later. Though, there wasn't an origin to the sound. It was just thickening in the air, if that makes sense. So, she had nowhere to run. I chalk it up to the wind since its fall and continued forward. 10 minutes in, I heard my voice calling to my dog from the west. It stopped us in our tracks. It sounded raspy, choppy, cut, like somebody had cut and edited my voice. Cookies, get over here, baby girl. Sounded like Cookies, get here, girl. My dog looks at me with such confusion, and I tell her to stay beside me. The voice is much louder. When I say it was louder, it was like the volume had been raised, but not the tone of my voice, which is what Cookie responds to. We start heading back, roughly 30 minutes left. I'm spooked and thinking of the mistakes I made to attract this hot mess. Using the same route, not having a phone on me, using a flashlight, and talking instead of listening, not blessing the hike, wearing a neon yellow vest, not telling my girlfriend when to expect me back. Briskly walking back, the sounds of my voice became more warped and bent, but closer. Cookies and me ended up running the rest of the way. I personally felt like if I looked back to see what was behind me, it would be the last thing that I ever saw. My voice was blaring at this point and filled with anger, booming from both west and east. I have never been more scared nor have ever ran so fast. Cookies was whining and rushing me along, but also wouldn't look back at me. We broke free from the trail. The voices ceased instantly. The sounds of nature returned in its place. I don't know what to think.
I have been hesitant on posting any story mainly due to the fact that I don't want anyone ever thinking that I or the person in this story is about is crazy. Although saying this actually happened sounds very cliche, but I can assure you the following stories are true. Now, before I begin the first story, just for a bit of background, I am an intern for a church that does work on a Navajo reservation site, helping the community on people's homes like roofing repair, repainting, and interior fixing. 8 to 5 with good pay and nice people, so overall, I'm happy with it. And as a bit of a disclaimer, I'm not trying to offend Navajo tradition in any way. This is just a first-hand story of what is currently happening on my trip. Over the past 2 months of the internship, I began to grow fairly close with some of the residents on the res. One lady in particular that I got to know pretty well was the superstitious type. Like, said never be outside at night, or other random seeming things to me, like that. But the biggest taboo I never knew to mention, mainly because I was told by my superiors, was Navajo folklore, like skinwalkers. However, one day it was very different in the sense that the question was just burning within me. I was on my lunch break after wrapping up painting parts of her house, and she sits next to me on her porch, and we talk for a while, but I finally feel comfortable enough to ask her about any folklore about werewolves or anything of that sorts. I didn't really expect a response. I thought maybe she'd quickly say no and then change the topic. But if anything, I was more scared I might offend her. But to my surprise, she turns her head looking toward the outside scenery, hesitates, but then says, "Yes, I know some, and I've experienced it too." She proceeded to tell me a description on the apparent equivalent to a werewolf. To paraphrase, she said this: "Werewolves look like normal people, but masked in a white paint, covering their face, arms and chest. Their whole body as white as corpse, covered with black symbols, quite possibly related to devil worshipping. More specifically, they are gravediggers and necromancers as well. They dig up bodies only to steal jewelry, although they may perform other acts to corpses," as she quickly strayed away from going into too much detail about that. "Werewolves also get their power from the devil. That is how they are able to possess such supernatural strength and endurance." I was surprised to hear this, although I figured werewolves wouldn't look anything like that in Twilight or Scooby-Doo. Although, deep down, even I thought she sounded a bit crazy. Before I could ask more questions about these werewolves, she began to tell me her own stories and interactions with these supernatural beasts, and her story still gives me the chills. She explained that one day, her and her husband were driving on the curvy roads alongside the mountains only to find a woman with her face covered by her hands and was kneeling in the middle of the road, appearing as though she was crying. The woman looks up towards the car headlights to reveal the very same white paint and sacrificial symbols mentioned previously. Her husband honked his horn and quickly slams on the brakes, only to be too late, and hears the loud cracking sound of the woman's bones and the splash of blood all over the windshield. Once her and her husband stopped the car safely and processed what the hell just happened, they quickly run over to the spot to where they hit the woman. However, once they got to the spot, there was no body. But not only that, there was no trace of blood either. And just as a side note, this part of the res had some cliffs, but it was relatively flat land, so it would be obvious to tell where somebody is, especially if they just got hit by a car. Puzzled by what the possible explanation could be for this occurrence, her and her husband drove back home, trying to neglect the thought that they had just witnessed a werewolf. However, being the non-paranormal believers that they were at the time, they tried to just close this mind's occurrence off as them just losing their mind. As interesting as her story was, this got me thinking, is it possible for this werewolf story to be true? Or is this her own way of describing a skinwalker or other supernatural phenomenon because she didn't think I knew what a skinwalker was? This question kept circulating through my head, so as you could expect, the following nights made it harder for me to sleep comfortably. Because of that, during the workdays, I would feel more and more mentally drained, almost paranoid. At the end of week around 6, I was sitting in the car, driving back to the church site, and was in the mental state of mind where I was half awake and half asleep. My buddy was driving, and claimed that he wanted to pull over to the gas station that was near the church to grab a couple of snacks to munch on during our debrief time in our cabin. Since I was too tired to argue, I said fine and laid my face against the window and tried to doze off for a while waiting for my friend. However, I had the weirdest feeling that I was being watched, so naturally I opened my eyes and looked out the window. I saw nothing. However, when I turned my head, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a white figure, just as the woman described previously. I looked back and nothing was there, but I swear I saw something. Since it was beginning to get darker outside, I quickly sat up in my seat to readjust my vision, but when I looked back out the window, it was almost as though the figure had vanished. Perplexed, I stepped outside the car and looked around, but there was no trace of a creature even existing. My buddy comes back to the car and questions what the heck I was doing. Debating whether or not I should tell him, I decided to just say, "Oh, I'm just getting some fresh air. Let's head out." The following days have been even worse for me. My mood is getting worse. I'm feeling way more paranoid that something is out there. And at night, I can almost swear that I hear a scream in the far distance. Everything outside just looks 100 times scarier too, because there's barely any outside light besides the moon. So everything has more of an exaggerated appearance. But believe me, I know I sound crazy, but the worst part is that if I tell anyone, they'll think I'm crazy too. So I've been debating whether or not I actually saw the werewolf or skinwalker the lady described, or if it was just maybe my tired eyes playing tricks on me. I hope someone can find some sort of answer to this mystery. Also, if you have any similar paranormal stories like this, please share in the comments.
I live in Las Vegas, Nevada, and a popular nature escape for many locals is a nature preserve area called Red Rock Canyon, which is a part of a larger BLM network. This preserve is made of multiple hiking areas and a couple off-road trails for 4x4 vehicles. One of these trails is called the Willow Springs Picnic Area, an off-road trail which connects the La Madre Mountain wilderness and is home to glyphs left over from the Paiute tribe. Yesterday, my husband and I decided to go on a little excursion into this trail. We took our Ford Escape up this slow, winding trail until we came to a pull-off where we stopped to appreciate the scenery and for me to harvest some prickly pears or cactus fruit to snack on later. About then, a couple jogging or hiking gear with no camping equipment and no supplies or even water power walked up the rough, rocky dirt road. Something was off about this couple. When I nodded to greet them and gave them a simple, "Howdy," they cut me a look of cold aggression and anger, and then in exact unison, they nodded back as though they were copying exactly what I had just done with them. And by in unison, I mean they did it as though they were one person controlling two bodies. A few moments later, we pulled up ahead, fully expecting to have passed them on the trail. This trail is meant more for vehicles than people, and if you are going to hike it, you are probably going to find that it is slow going. However, we never ran into them again. It was as if they vanished into thin air. Later, we turned around because it was getting late and we didn't have camping gear, and it felt like something was watching us. When we get back to the parking lot, my husband decided to take some photos, and in several pictures, there were these red eyes peering back at us from the cliffs. Furthermore, this is not the first time we felt like we were being watched on that trail.
My girlfriend and I were driving from Bremerton, Washington to Shelton, Washington for a New Year's party at my friend's house. Now, I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with this highway, but it's a curvy road with only one lane on either side. It was around 11 o'clock at night, so it was pretty dark out. When we were almost to Shelton, we came around a curve to find something standing directly in the middle of our side of the road. Luckily, there weren't any other cars in the other lane, because I would have either hit them, or whatever was standing in the road because I had to swerve all the way into the other lane to avoid it. After we barely missed this thing, Neither me or my girlfriend could figure out what the fuck was standing in the road. This thing looked gnarly, almost like it was snarling. It kind of resembled a bear, but it was also way too tall to be a bear. I guess you could say it had the legs of a deer, and the upper body was a bear. I don't know if skinwalkers are in this area, but whatever it was, it did not look familiar or friendly. I've seen plenty of deer and bear to know that it wasn't either of those things. My girlfriend and I both just refer to it as the demon bear that almost didn't let us make it into 2020. Can anybody help me figure out what the hell we saw? I was just outside. It's 11:30, and I was having a cigarette. It's a small town, no traffic, no noise. But then I sense something, and out of the corner of my eye, see something walking down the street on all fours. So I look up, and it's gone. At first, I brushed it off, and then I got that feeling, the what if, especially with always being in this sub. So I get the chills and immediately put my cigarette out. I rush inside and close the door and go to the kitchen. So I look out the window, and I don't know if anyone will believe me, but there was a whole pale outline of something across the street behind the trash can watching me. And it's a trash can on a desolate street. No clutter, nothing. And we locked eyes, and I immediately started getting the chills again. So I started walking away through the hallway, and I took a peek out the hallway window, and the thing was next to my truck. I ran to my room, took 3 shots of whiskey, and now don't want to leave the room for the rest of my life. It wasn't a dog or a raccoon, or a possum. This thing looked like a heroin addict or chupacabra. This happened a few months ago, and I've kept it to myself until recently, when I told my dad about it. I was with my brother, who we'll call John for now, and one of our old friends, and we were walking back through a forest, back to where we came from. Since I'm younger than both of them, they tend to annoy me a lot, but this time, they were being really annoying, so I decided to walk ahead. I was about halfway between them and the exit to the forest when I heard things snapping on my left. I just brushed it off and kept walking, but then I started to hear a low mumbling noise, so I stopped and looked around. I asked if anyone was there and got no reply, until about 40 seconds later, I heard what sounded like my brother saying, "Come here, I need your help." So I asked what was wrong while keeping my distance because something about his voice sounded wrong. It was distorted. So I waited for a few seconds. Then he said it again. "Come here, I need your help." But in the exact same way as before. So I moved to the side, and that's when I saw it. It was a deer, but it was on its back legs, and its body was rigid and twisted. But the worst part was its eyes. They were exactly the same as mine. I didn't believe that it was a bad creature. It actually seemed quite friendly, but nonetheless, I was scared. So I ran a mile back, and the whole time, I could feel it behind me when I got out of the forest. I fell to my knees and looked back to see it disappear behind some trees. But here's the weird thing. Ever since then, I've been having dreams about not being chased by it, or anything in the dreams I am in it. So I told my dad about this, and he did not look surprised or confused at all. He told me of similar events he had when he was young.
My sister and I take our 5 kids on road trips every year, all over the country. This year, in early June, we decided to stay a little closer to her home and drove 6 hours to Fort Davis, Texas. West Texas, by the way. We stayed at a campsite in the state park there in Davis Mountains. The camping sites are broken into groups that branch off the main road. We were the only people in this loop, except for the camp hosts, and they were across the street and 2 or 3 campsites over. Our site was big and surrounded by bushes, and it sat on a small creek. The first night we were there, a big thunderstorm moved in at about bedtime. We had a large tent, and then a small one-person tent for the boys to share. My nephew and my son, ages 8 and 9, were going to sleep in the smaller tent, while the rest of us were in the big one. Once the storm really got going, my nephew became scared and came into the big tent. I didn't want my son to be alone, so I grabbed my pillow and went into the small tent with him. It stopped raining, and we fell asleep. I woke up sometime later. I really have no idea what time it was. I am a pretty light sleeper, so I don't know if I even had heard something. Then I started to hear a really weird sound, about a foot from the tent on the right side. I can only describe it as what a huge bug with wings, like something the size of my hand, would sound like if it were hitting plastic. Basically, a really loud fluttering noise. But it didn't make sense. It was the middle of the night, and I knew nothing was touching my tent. Then, right underneath this sound came what sounded like an animal-like exhale. Really jagged and almost growling noise. Not human, and from something big. Kinda sounded like the clicker sound from The Last of Us. The sound was about maybe knee level, but both sounds started to travel in front of my tent, toward the creek, no more than a foot away from my tent. There was never an inhale, just a long exhale. Could have been an inhale. Either way, there was no break, and it never changed. Then at the last second, as it's about to pass, I hear feet under it. They sounded like they were coming from heavy work boots of a grown man. After it passed, I got a huge whiff of musky odor, like you get from a wild animal. I was so scared that I couldn't move and had to make myself breathe. I have never felt that kind of fear before, and didn't understand what I had just experienced. The next day, there were no tracks, even though there was a lot of mud around the cars and down by the creek. I thought at first maybe it was a mountain lion, but they are extremely quiet. My sister spoke with the ranger, and they said it was jaggling around down the creek. This was not a pig, okay? There were 2 distinct footsteps underneath it, not 4 little hooves. None of these sounds make any sense together, and I have never heard anything like that breathing or that fluttering sound. Not to mention how big the footsteps sounded for how long the breathing was. If you have any ideas, please share them. Most people think I am making it up or I am exaggerating, but if anything, I am not emphasizing it enough. This was primal terror. I was literally frozen with fear and couldn't feel my body anymore. I have never felt so naive or stupid for being in the wilderness like that before. I want to know what it was. I talked about this experience yesterday and was directed to Skinwalkers. Let me know what you think. I am not native and this was not on a res, but I have seen and felt spirits more than a few times, especially when I am somewhere new. Hello there. My name is Bradley, and I am somewhat of an adrenaline junkie. What I do to get this fix, if adrenaline, is I would go out in search of nothing in particular and just hope something happens. Sometimes, I get more than I wanted, and this is one of those stories with the exception that I wasn't seeking adrenaline this time. Be warned that some events in this story may be disturbing for the faint of heart. This is your warning. Continue at your own risk. The date is October 14th, 2010. I used to live on a decent-sized property in the mountains of northwestern Georgia. I loved it up there. So many places to wander off to, and so many places have a little hideout. It was the day before my uncle's birthday, and me and him wanted to go out to our favorite hangout spot, which we called the broccoli tree. In a nutshell, it was an uprooted tree with a hole big enough to fit a couple of chairs and some other things where the roots had been. We did some modifications and put a tarp over it so we could stay in there even if it rained. So, me and my uncle are walking out to the tree, which is about a good 15-minute walk from the front porch of the house. As soon as we break into the tree line, we start messing around and pushing each other playfully, without a care in the world. My uncle and I had walked to the tree so many times we can find it in the pitch black darkness, so we weren't really that afraid. I sort of had this feeling that we were being watched, but I just shrugged it off a little and kept walking. Skip forward a little bit to our arrival at the tree. Nothing seemed out of place, so we went inside and sat down. We started to talk about specific things, what he had seen out hunting, and things like that. Then, he mentioned a skinwalker. Confused, I asked him what it was, and he broke it down so I could understand. He said that they were half man, half beast that could shapeshift. I laughed at this and asked him if he'd been playing too much Diablo recently, not thinking he was serious. He looked me in the eyes with dead, serious looks on his face and says he saw one while he was hunting. My excitement immediately turned to fear as I remembered that I felt something was watching us on the way to the tree. I told him I had a feeling we were being watched, and he said that he had felt it too. We start listening closely to see if we could hear anything outside the tree, but everything felt silent. We both looked at each other and decided we had to leave. We emerged from the tree, and he tells me to jump onto his back so he could run. I do so, and the moment I was on his back, he had a tight grip. We heard something from behind us. I go to turn around and look to see what it was, but my uncle told me not to. Then he started running to the house in almost pitch black darkness with something chasing after us. I could hear its footfalls behind us, and heavy breathing was getting louder as if it was getting closer. I scream faster at my uncle, and he starts dead-ass sprinting through the woods. Then the front porch light comes into view through the trees, and I say, "There it is." Then my uncle trips over himself, and we both catch air. I was flung a little higher, so I landed closer to the house than he did. I looked back at him, and he screamed at me to run and to not worry about him. I didn't listen. I ran over to help him when something hit me square in the chest, knocking me back. "Don't look!" my uncle screamed. I wish I would have listened. I look up to see a man with a dog-like head and glowing, solid white eyes. My uncle tries to scurry away from it, but it grabs him and picks him up to his feet and stares into his eyes. Then came a gunshot. The beast tosses my uncle into a tree and scurries away, frightened. That's when my other uncle comes up from behind me and helps my uncle up off the ground. I slowly stand up and wipe myself off, ask what that thing was. The uncle that was with me says only one word: Skinwalker. Then all three of us go back to the house. A couple of days later, the uncle that was with me was deployed overseas to Korea for the army. We tried to forget, but we just couldn't seem to get it off our minds. One night, I woke up at about 4 a.m. because of a dream I had had. I rubbed my eyes and let them adjust to the low levels of light and see the two glowing eyes again, right outside my window. I grabbed the flashlight I had in my room for late night bathroom runs and shine it right out the window. Within a few seconds, the skinwalker ran away, and I have yet to see him again. To this day, both of my uncles have not spoken a word about this and refuse to talk about it.
So, I've had strange experiences in Austin before, where I hear a strange, deep croaking sound, or my friends would feel something chasing them if they were in the woods. But I think it's finally starting to attack, and it's scaring the hell out of me. Every single way it moved and basically shapeshifted just screams Skinwalker to me. Basically, I went outside to smoke some weed as normal. I was on the second story of my house on the deck, which usually makes me feel pretty safe. But as I went on to the third bowl, I heard a light rustling of leaves that was like a raccoon that quickly morphed into an aggressive and erratic behavior. The rustling got louder, like it grew in size to that of a human. But even though it was humanoid, and even made a small groan that sounded like it was hungry, the way the sound of it moving could dart across my left to right ear, almost like it's moving faster than a cheetah, but almost more articulate and precise with its movements. I then started telling myself that I'm on the second floor, so it can't hurt me. But then what I feared would happen, happened. It quickly darted over to me, from what I'm guessing was like 30 yards in just a few seconds. It then quickly scurried up the pillars of my deck. I don't know if skinwalkers can climb, but then pounced onto the wood with a disturbingly loud thud. I accepted death at this moment, as I was helpless and realized that this thing is so much stronger than me. But for some reason, it jumped off almost hesitant to kill me. It scurried around and then hurdled my fence with no efforts or grunts. It then darted around my entire backyard within seconds. I'm honestly really scared, and I don't know what to do. I want to go out tonight and look for it so I can videotape it. If I die, then the video will be on my phone, and then there will finally be proof that this evil exists. I don't know what I saw, but I want to share this story that keeps me wondering if I really saw what I saw. I know I saw it, but could be my mind playing tricks on me. So here's my story. I got a new puppy a few weeks ago, and during this time, the motion sensor light broke on the side of our house. At around 10 p.m., I was taking him out to pee, and it was super dark and silent. I was kind of freaked out by the silence, but could hear trees cracking in the wind and weird sounds coming from a tiny forest area behind our house. I felt super paranoid, so I grabbed my pup and went inside. 2 or 3 hours later, I had to take the pup out for his last pee of the night. I picked him, went outside and replaced him on the ground right outside the door. When I did that, I looked to the left and saw a smallish black figure run like a dog and then grow as if it were running like a human and went behind our above-ground pool. Scared as hell, I picked my pup up immediately and ran inside, locked the door and just stared at the door waiting for something to come running up to the door. We have a 5-foot fence, but because my pup was only like 10 weeks old and could squeeze through the fence posts, so we had to zip tie construction barrier all around the fencing so nothing could get through. I thought that whatever it was that I saw, I wouldn't be able to escape. So I woke my dad up, grabbed a gun, and with his confidence, we checked the yard out and found nothing. Not telling my mom, the next morning, my mom takes the pup out at around 5:30 in the morning. I'm sleeping on the couch, and all I hear is my mom yell and run inside with the puppy because she saw a black figure run behind our pool. I still had my gun near me, so I grabbed it and went to see what was outside. I looked outside everywhere to make sure there wasn't an animal stuck on the inside of our fence, but found nothing. I told my mom about what I saw the night before and was just kind of in agreement that it was weird, but that was the end of that. So that's the end of the story, and now I'm kind of scared to be alone, in the dark at my house at night. It could be my mind playing tricks on me, but I swear I saw what I did.
My family was on vacation in a town 5 hours away from my hometown in Kansas. We were staying with my uncle and his family. We went up there because my father is a gym rat, and he was supporting his friend in a bodybuilding competition. My dad drove up to his friend's hotel alone, without us, because they were going out to drink and go to clubs probably. We were also super tired and already getting ready for bed. I was half asleep when my father left, but it was just me, my older brother, and mother. Anyway, flashed forward like an hour or two. My dad had a little too much to drink and was drunk and unable to drive. My mom and uncle drove the 20-ish minutes across town to pick him up. They get to the bar and they get my dad in the car. My mom was kind of mad at this point. It was around midnight, and that's late for my mom. They get back on the road and heading to my uncle's house. My uncle was driving out of nowhere, and a large deer runs next to the car. My mom also said his head was on backwards. This is Kansas, and we have a lot of deer here because, well, there's a lot of woods around, but this was in a highway in a large city. Not to mention that deer was not in front of the car like a normal deer would be, but as though the deer was racing the car. My mom says the deer was staring into her window, into her eyes, and she said the deer looked like the devil was inside of it. She said he looked like he was angry, frustrated, and just fear and complete hate in his eyes. Also, the deer was like galloping like a house. My mom says it just seemed super off. She was freaking out and angry, and my uncle didn't see it, and my dad was drunk, and honestly, doesn't even know if he saw it. She got to my uncle's house, freaking the hell out, shaking, and couldn't believe what had happened. She couldn't sleep that night, obviously, because of what happened. Not until months later, maybe even a year later, I stumbled upon skinwalkers and what they are. It terrified me, and then I realized my mom had an experience with a skinwalker. I told my mom, and she got goosebumps. She knew what they were, but I connected the dots when I brought up the deer. This was a few nights ago, and I can't stop thinking about it. I just brought it up and she shivered, and the experience makes her even scared to think about. My dad is very skeptical and doesn't believe her, but I, on the other hand, 100% do.